of the biggest changes that Underworld Awakening introduced was Selene and Michael's daughter Eve. On paper, bringing in the next generation made a lot of sense, because it gave the franchise a new character who could eventually carry the story forward. The movie even became the highest-grossing entry in the series, which made it seem like the future was looking bright. But things didn't play out that way. Instead of launching a fresh era, it ended up being the last successful installment before the series started losing momentum. When Underworld Blood Wars arrived a few years later, audiences simply weren't as invested anymore. And one of the biggest reasons was the absence of Scott Speedman's Michael. Michael had always been one of the emotional anchors of the franchise because his relationship with Selene helped define the story from the very beginning. Even though Eve inherited many of his abilities as a vampire-lycan hybrid, fans never connected with her in the same way. Rather than replacing Michael, she mostly reminded viewers that he was missing. On top of that, introducing another hybrid alongside the Super Lycan storyline made the mythology feel even more crowded. The series had already built a complicated history involving vampire elders, lycans, bloodlines, and ancient betrayals, so adding another incredibly powerful character only made everything feel harder to follow instead of making the story more exciting. The franchise also made a decision that ended up hurting it even more because Michael was constantly mentioned even after Scott Speedman had left the series. His presence was always hanging over the story, but he was never actually there. That left fans wondering why such an important character kept being referenced without returning. Instead of moving forward naturally, the films felt caught between honoring Michael and replacing him. That approach didn't satisfy longtime viewers because they wanted either a proper reunion with Selene or a clear ending to Michael's story. Because of that reaction, Underworld Blood Wars made the smart choice of pushing Eve into the background. She barely influenced the main conflict, and that probably helped keep the movie focused. Looking ahead, there's really no reason to suddenly bring Eve back into the spotlight. Doing so would only remind audiences that both Michael and Selene are largely absent from the franchise now. The last few movies already showed that simply mentioning older characters without fully bringing them back doesn't create excitement. Instead, it reminds fans of what they're missing. If Underworld gets another chance through either a sixth movie or a television series, it would probably be much better off starting with an entirely new cast of Vampires and Lycans. The world itself has always been one of the franchise's biggest strengths, because there's plenty of room to tell fresh stories without depending on the same handful of characters forever. That approach would allow the series to expand instead of constantly looking backward. Even though Underworld Blood Wars became the least successful film in the franchise, it surprisingly left behind an interesting setup for whatever comes next. Throughout the series, the conflict between vampires and werewolves constantly evolved. The original movie introduced the vampires as noble warriors hunting dangerous lycans, so audiences naturally assumed they were the heroes. But as the story continued, that perspective completely changed, because viewers discovered the vampires had actually started the centuries-long war. The lycans weren't simply monsters running wild. Many of them were victims who had been enslaved and abused for generations. As more secrets were uncovered across later movies, the moral lines between both species became increasingly blurred. Neither side was completely innocent anymore, because both vampires and lycans committed terrible acts throughout their history. Every new chapter revealed another betrayal, another massacre, or another leader driven by revenge rather than justice. That made the conflict much more interesting because there were no true heroes left, only characters trying to survive. By the time Blood Wars reached its ending, the balance had shifted once again. The Lycans, led by Marius, had become the primary threat after seeking greater power through hybrid blood. Although the vampires still carried plenty of blame for everything that happened over the centuries, Marius pushed the Lycans toward outright conquest. His defeat finally allowed both factions to step away from endless war, at least temporarily. That fragile peace actually creates one of the strongest foundations for a sixth movie. Instead of repeating another vampire versus lycan civil war, the story could explore what happens after centuries of fighting finally stop. Peace doesn't automatically erase generations of hatred, because old grudges never disappear overnight. Both races would still distrust each other, even if they agreed to stop fighting for the moment. That alone creates enough tension for an entirely new storyline. That doesn't mean Beckinsale has completely walked away from action movies. She has continued appearing in films like Jolt and Canary Black, although those projects leaned more toward grounded action rather than supernatural fantasy. They also didn't require the elaborate costumes, sword fights, and physically demanding martial arts sequences that became synonymous with Selene over the years. After playing the same iconic vampire warrior across multiple movies, it's understandable why she might want to explore different types of roles. The truth is that Underworld may actually benefit from that decision. The series has reached a point where constantly relying on Selene risks making every new story feel repetitive. By the end of Blood Wars, she had already become an elder, which placed her among the highest-ranking vampire leaders. From a storytelling perspective, it no longer makes much sense for someone in that position to personally handle every battlefield mission. Her responsibilities would naturally shift toward leadership rather than frontline combat. More importantly, Selene's character arc already feels complete. Across 5 films, she uncovered the truth about her family's murder, exposed centuries of lies within the vampire hierarchy, defeated countless enemies, and finally brought down many of the leaders responsible for endless bloodshed. She also faced betrayals from nearly everyone she trusted, survived impossible battles, and ultimately helped create an opportunity for peace between vampires and Lycans. There really isn't much left for her to prove because she has already accomplished nearly every goal that defined her journey. Bringing her back for another movie would likely mean repeating familiar themes instead of giving audiences something genuinely fresh. The same problem affected the later films whenever they tried to recreate earlier emotional moments without Michael's full involvement. Michael's absence remained one of the biggest weaknesses of the later movies because fans were emotionally invested in his relationship with Selene from the very beginning. Even though David became a likable and capable ally, audiences never viewed him as a replacement. The chemistry between Selene and Michael was simply too important to the franchise's identity. Once that relationship disappeared, many viewers felt something essential had been lost. That's exactly why moving forward with entirely new protagonists makes far more sense than trying to recreate the original cast. A 6th movie shouldn't spend its time explaining where Michael, Selene, or Eve are every few scenes. Instead, it should embrace a fresh generation living in the world whose characters helped shape. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one. And don't forget to like this video, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to our channel to stay in the loop. And if you want, you can share your thoughts about this video in the comments section down below.